Right. Yeah, I was reading a review of this book on witches and just one town in New England. And what life was like there, and it's this miserable life where people are dying and diseases, and the Indians are going to get us, and the drought, and this winter storm, and pretty much life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah.
Right? And there's we have no explanation for this. It's the witches, right?
Do you know the story behind that? What they think the motivation for the witch trials were?
Which ones? The Salem?
Ergot poisoning.
Oh, ergot poisoning. Yes, I know about that.
That is why, because there's a lot of historical evidence that points to ergot poisoning and mass hallucinations and chaos.
Right.
There's one from, I believe it was 1950? There was one in France where they had a situation that was similar. There was ergot poisoning where a bunch of people died, in fact, because ergot is also toxic. Yeah, but in some quantities, it produces these LSD-like effects, and they coincide the Salem witch trials, and this is controversial, but there seems to be some evidence that points to that coincides it with a late frost, and that this late frost produced this fungus on the wheat and the grains, and that these grains were likely infected with ergot. And I think they've found evidence of ergot.
I have read this. I think it's possible as an element. No human behavior is explained by one thing.
Right. It doesn't exist in a vacuum.
So you I could see one, say, teenage girl does this and hallucinates and is chattering in voices or whatever. And then her other friends, they start mimicking it, sort of a social contagion. Like it's fun, and then it's like, oh, it's more than fun. And then the adults go like, oh, what's going on here? And then you have like a half a dozen elements going on there.
Right.
And in the case of the witch, in a way, the witch craze is a kind of conspiracy theory, right? Because one thing conspiracy theories do is they offer a causal explanation for chaos and randomness. Our brains are not well designed by evolution to understand randomness. My examples of this are like the stars in the sky are random, but they look like patterns, right? Or the Apple iPod Shuffle feature was introduced, in which your songs are fed to you randomly, and Apple got complaints. It's not random. Certain songs are coming up more than others. Like, that is random. So Apple, apparently, I'm told, had to reprogram it and program it so it feels random intuitively, but it's not. It's crazy, right? So much of life is just randomness, right? Shit happens. The bumper sticker, shit happens. And but that's uncomfortable. It's like, no, there must be something behind it. And if you don't have an explanation, no meteorology to explain weather, and no germs theory of disease to explain disease and so forth, what have you got? Witches.
Right. Well, if you talked about the satanic craze of the 80s, right? So imagine the satanic craze of the 80s, and then on top of that, ergot poisoning.
Right.
Well, oh my God, now you're drowning witches.
Right.
And that was the thing. They would drown a lot of witches, and they would say that if they drowned them, if they lived, clearly they were witches.
Right.
Well, no one fucking lived. So it was a lot of whoops. Well, I guess we killed a fucking innocent. They just kept killing people, thinking that they were witches.
Right. And there's a lot of research on this also, accusing people who are marginalized, poor people, women, and so on, who didn't have any power. And so the magistrates, people that had power and money that could have lawyers, whatever, they escaped.
Right. And also there was motivation to accuse people of horrific things, and you could use that to take their property. Do you know the story of Elizabeth Bathory?
No.
Elizabeth Bathory is a woman who lived, God, I want to say it was like the 1200s or something like that. And she was accused of doing these horrible things to other women. Like, she was accused of being like one of the greatest mass murderers and serial killers that's ever existed. And that she would take these beautiful young women and kill them and bathe in their blood and all this. And so we told this story, and then someone sent me a link to an article that said there's probably something more to that. And that really what it was they were accusing her of these things so that they could imprison her and take her land. And that it might have been that. And so they accused of her of these horrific atrocities in order to take away her land.
Yeah, there's some of that kind of practical thing and revenge against people you don't like.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's something called preemptive denunciation. You denounce people before you get denounced.
Right.
And that you denouncing somebody means you must not be a witch if you're denouncing them. And then you get this kind of competitive denunciation. No, you're a witch. No, you're a witch.
Right, right,
Much
right.
like the communist show trials, right? You got to denounce your neighbors as communists before they denounce you, or as non-communists, they denounce you, right? And
so that's the fear during mass hysteria, that people are going to turn on each other because they're afraid that someone's going to come after them, so they come after you first.
Right. I think we're going through that a little bit with cancel culture.
Sure, for sure, yeah.
I'm going to, get somebody on my campus and they used the wrong pronoun or the wrong adjective, and I'm going to denounce them before I get denounced and make the mistake.
Right. I will be the social justice warrior, so you couldn't possibly think that I've done anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get this thing called pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else is thinking something when, in fact, nobody's actually thinking that. The classic experiment on this was binge drinking on college campuses. So you ask individual students by themselves, how do you feel about this? I don't really like it, but I know everybody else likes it. So everybody thinks that everybody else likes binge drinking, but actually individually they really don't like it. But I got to do it because everybody else is doing it, right? So this, in part, explains the kind of sustaining of the Nazi regime. Initially Hitler was popular because he stopped the Depression and got the economy going again and so on. And then he starts escalating, and everybody thinks, well, I'm not too happy about this policy, and the thing with the Jews, I don't know. But everybody else seems to be going along with it. And then by the time you get to the point where somebody needs to speak up and say, this is wrong, they have concentration camps for those people. And they did it in a way that you could see your neighbor being hauled out and think, I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm not saying anything.
Right.
So this is what's called a common knowledge problem. If I know that you know that I know something, then together we can kind of both stand up and say, we're putting a stop to this, right?